So, yeah, so this is my question. I mean, I do. And no, something one of the issues. So here you sitting. Listen, hello everyone. Hello. Shalom, shalom. So good to see you guys here this afternoon. My name is Dr. Victoria Sarvati, and we'll make sure. Got my little gallery over here. Have you got your script to talk about?
Sure. Yes, absolutely.
Listen, if you want some refreshments, you're welcome to go back there and get some. I would think all of it or most of it's kosher. So if you would like to indulge, you are welcome to. Sharon, I know you brought a bunch of stuff and we got some fruit as well. Anyway, we are so excited about having our friends here. This is just the epitome of what I think God is talking about when he says that two sticks become one. Talk about, the joining together of the Jewish and the Christian community. It's events like this that I think is what has been prophesied in the scripture for us. God saw it in the beginning. And so we're so happy to be actually fulfilling it. Have you thought about that you're fulfilling scripture? And it's so wonderful to have you, our Jewish community here, our friends, and Sharon, 365, Israel 365. It is just a joy. It warms our heart. We're so glad. Thank you for coming. And then, of course, we have the Nathaniel Fellowship that's here too, a great representation from our fellowship. I'm always happy to see you guys. You are my family. Anyway, I just wanted to, do you want to introduce, you probably have a bio and all of that?
Sure.
So I'm going to bring Sharon with flowers.
Yeah, flowers are for you though.
For me,
yes. Because somebody just had a birthday a few days ago.
Oh,
so a little birthday. Yeah. I'll use the microphone. Hello, everyone. So first of all, a very big thank you to Paul Sarvati and Dr. Victoria Sarvati for just being such wonderful friends. And, you know, whenever I say, hey, I've got this idea, this rabbit, yes, Sharon, whatever you want. And she says, yes. And we say, okay. And then we've got a house full of friends here. So, which is so great. I have a lot to tell you, but I'm going to try and squeeze it in really quick. First of all, we're in the middle of a very special time between Passover and Shavuot, counting the Omer. And so the book that we read on the holiday of Shavuot coming up is called the Book of Ruth, Megillus Rus. And this was actually the year that, and you're going to hear from our friend Rabbi Leo D in just a moment, the year that he lost his family. That Israel 365 quickly put this together, the proceeds of the sales of this book to Rabbi D's family and different projects. So this is a gift for you and Paul. So I thank you so much. And there's some really, it's a really beautiful book anyway. And maybe Rabbi D might hit on that a little bit today. Anyway, so thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah, big hug. Thank you. Thank you. We also just did a webinar together. Like we've had a very busy day already.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you to all of you for joining us here today. We really appreciate it. I know some people have traveled from big distances, so I really appreciate that. Nobody further than Rabbi D and his wife Eliza D, who came all the way from Efrat in Israel to Texas, which we really appreciate. So I'm going to introduce him in just one second. I want to mention that next Sunday is Mother's Day, and we've got an activity for you on Mother's Day in the afternoon. Our friend Naomi McNabb, giveaway Naomi. She lives in North Richland Hills. She's going to be hosting something similar to this with our friend Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. So I'm going to have all that information for you after today's event, and we'd love for you to join us 2:00. Mother's Day. And if you're a mother or a woman, 3:00, 2:00, 3:00, I don't know, we'll tell you. But we're going to have some special gifts for all the ladies on Mother's Day because, you know, we have some books available from Israel 365, our store, so I can help you with that after. And if anyone has any questions at the end for me or for Rabbi D, he'll be able to take that. So 6 months the day before October 7th, on April 7th, Rabbi D and his family suffered a terrible tragedy, which he's going to tell you about. He's come to Texas, the first time in Texas, to bring us hope. And we're going to hear stories of resilience. So we've really had an enjoyable few days together. We had a beautiful Shabbat in our neighborhood. And by the way, a special thank you to Josh and Lisa Rothstein, who've been hosting Rabbi D and his wife, Eliza D. And we hope we know it's your first trip to Texas. We hope it's not your last trip to Texas. So ladies and gentlemen, please make Rabbi D feel so welcome.
Thank you, Sharon, for the introduction, for organizing today, along with Dr. Victoria Savadi and Paul Savadi. Thank you for your hospitality. Thank you to all of you, and thank you particularly to my wife, Eliza. This is also technically part of our honeymoon trip. We had a number of trips like this where we squeeze in a day or two here or there, and we share it with as many people as we can. So. First thing to say is that you might recognize my accent is not so Israeli. I was born in England, so it's a pleasure to be back in the colonies. You're doing an adequate job. I Googled Dallas. I discovered that Dallas is named after a village in the north of Scotland. 200 people today, has no shops, has no hotel. The hotel closed down 20 years ago. It's got a church and a castle, and I believe a football team, five-a-side, of 10-year-old boys who play in the park on a Sunday morning. So very similar to Dallas, except for the millions of people and the international shopping malls and the international football team. So I'm glad that you're following in the footsteps of the mother country. The topic today is From Darkness to Light. And it's really my story. But it's also the story of the Jewish people, the story of Israel today, and the story of every single one of us in this room. And I'll start by telling you very briefly what happened to my family. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about the girls, about Lucy, Maya, and Rena. And then I want to talk to you about how we deal with tragedy, with trauma, which I think is part of the healing process that we all are in. Everybody has trauma. And I hate it when people say to me, Rabbi, I've got trauma. It's not like your trauma, but it's, I say everybody's trauma is the worst trauma that they could possibly have until, God forbid, they have something worse. So we're all suffering the same trauma. And then I want to talk about that trauma in the context of the 7th of October. And I want to talk about where that takes us all and what we need to do next. So that is really the plan. And I've got, I think, an hour, maybe take some questions. On the 7th of April, 2023, we set off from our home in Efrat. It was the second day of Passover that year. In Israel, it's not a festival in a sense. It's just a regular weekday. Here, it's actually a festival. We drove, it was Friday morning, we drove up the 90 highway through the Jordan Valley in two cars. Lucy took my daughter Maya, who was 20, and my daughter Rena, who was 15. I had my daughter Tali and my son Yehuda, and my fifth child Karen was in Jerusalem for that weekend in her national service. Waze took us up the 90 highway and wanted us to take a left halfway up to avoid some traffic. I remembered Lucy's voice saying to me clearly the last time we went, don't take the left, go straight on, it's much less stressful. So I continued straight, she took a left, encountered two Hamas terrorists, and we buried my daughters on the Sunday morning and my wife on the Tuesday after she had donated her organs and saved 5 lives. A little bit about the girls. There is one sort of idea that Lucy loved. Whenever she had to give a Dvar Torah, she'd say something about the Torah portion. She would often say that the longest palindrome in the Torah in Hebrew, so the longest word in Hebrew that in the Torah that reads the same forwards and backwards is the word v'natnu. And the word v'natnu means and they gave. And if you read it backwards, it also reads v'natnu, and they gave. And her interpretation of this was that whenever you give, you get back so much more in return. And that was her experience of life. And that was something which she liked to say many times. And after a while, I stopped really sort of thinking about it particularly until this tragedy took place. And we were in Hadassah Ein Kerem Hospital in Jerusalem. And on that fateful day, the Monday, when they came to us and said that the 2 bullets that hit her brainstem and her spinal cord had killed her brain, and there was no possibility of reviving her, but we could donate our organs. Would we be prepared to do that? So I took rabbinical advice, because even though I'm a rabbi, these decisions are very complex, and organ donation is its own complex story in Judaism, but this was permissible. I took a vote from my 3 kids. I said, what do you want to do? It was unanimous. They wanted to do it. And we gave the go ahead, and that we thought would be it. An altruistic act that took us a few moments to make the decision. And we had so many other things going on in our life at that time that really it didn't take a lot of our attention. Little did I expect, a few days later, I get a call from the head of organ donation in Israel. He says, Rabbi D, please would you and the kids come to meet the recipients in a week's time at Beilinson Hospital in Tel Aviv with an international press conference. So I said, okay, I was saying yes to everything that time. I still say yes to pretty much everything. And we turned up. It was about 2 weeks after the tragedy. And as we assumed, we'd walk room to room and we would see these, the recipient of the lungs, recipient of the heart, lying in bed with tubes on them. And maybe they'd just be about to say hello, and that would be it. And it wasn't like that. We sat in the lobby of Beilinson Hospital, and one by one, each of them walked in and sat next to us and shook our hand. It was absolutely unbelievable. We had the whole world press in front of us, and strange things happened. You see, this was the first time one of the first times perhaps, that recipients knew who the donor was and vice versa. Because in most countries in the world, there are patient confidentiality laws. And even in Israel, I think, but because it was such a public situation, everybody knew exactly where the organs had come from. And so they all consented to be part of this ceremony. So when the heart recipient, Lital, sat down next to my daughters, and the doctors brought out a stethoscope and said, would you like to hear the heart of your mother beating in her chest? And they listened to it. The picture went viral on international global media. And a week later, the Daily Mail, in fact, a day later, the Daily Mail called up my daughter and said, we'd like to have an exclusive article to interview you for the website and for the newspaper. The website's the largest English language news website in the world, 300 million views. And we would have the exclusive right to interview on this topic, how it felt to hear your mother's voice, her heart. which they agreed. They flew over literally the day after Charles's coronation in order to they came to a frat in order to interview the girls. Strangely, I walked in to see how they were doing, and I said, hello. They ignored me completely. They just wanted to focus on the girls, which was absolutely fine. They're much more interesting than I am. It had a big impact, apparently, on global organ donation. And a year later, I heard the head of organ donation in Israel being interviewed on the radio, and they asked him why had organ donation in Israel gone up 33% in the last year, and he said because of Lucy D. And I can't tell you the amount of satisfaction and comfort that we got from that whole process, which was totally unexpected, and it was complete fulfillment of what Lucy would say, for nothing. When you give, you get back 1,000 times a return, even from places that you never would have expected. And on the same theme, Maya was in her final year, was a counselor for year 9 girls in a school in the south of Israel, a school with a poor community. And in Israel, the 9th grade is the beginning of high school. And a lot of the girls come from many different places. They don't have friends. Maya felt this because when we made Aliyah, we came to live in Israel. She was 11. It was about 6 months before her bat mitzvah. She left all her friends behind. She wasn't able to celebrate with her friends. So she felt that loneliness and that difficulty of making friends with teenage girls herself. And so she was so sensitive to it, she instituted a program every Thursday morning break time, which is the last break of the week, where she invited all the girls in the year 9 to come to have some snacks. And she would prepare a little few words about the Torah portion of the week. And it was an excuse really for those girls who hadn't yet made friends to sit down with each other and to get together and to meet each other. And she probably did it about 10 times. And she probably spent about $10 of her own money on each occasion. The whole thing maybe cost her $100. And then the tragedy struck, and her friends said, wow, this is a great idea. Let's spread this idea across Israel. And today, across Israel and across the world, there are about 300 or 400 high schools that are doing this in one break time a week in year 9 in memory of Maya. And just to show you how these things come back to you, about 6 months ago, the headmistress of a high school in Manchester called me up and said, I'm bringing my girls to Jerusalem for a trip, and they would like to meet you to talk about Maya. I said, why is that? They said, because we've been doing this initiative for 3 years in memory of Maya, and now they'd like to hear more about who she was. And so the comfort of that was just incredible, how it comes back to you. Rena was also someone who was very much engaged in acts of kindness. She volunteered in a very nice youth activity in Israel. It's actually the biggest youth group in Israel, called Shomer HaChadash, which means guarding the new. I don't know what that stands for, but kids from all parts of Israel, Jewish, Arab, religious, whatever, they go in groups, stay in tents on Thursday night, which is like Friday night here, it's weekend, in a farm somewhere around Israel. And then the Friday, they volunteer all day with their time to help the farmers to dig or to collect the produce. And it's a beautiful thing. She did it for about 10 times before the tragedy struck. And then we wanted to do a lot of projects to memorialize the girls. We made springs, and we planted forests, and we needed labor. And when we started doing this, I get a call from the head of Shomer Chadash, the literally tens of thousands of kids around the country doing this. And he said, we will provide the labor. And we had hundreds, maybe thousands of kids helping us with these initiatives over time. So when you give something, it comes back to you many times. How do you deal with tragedy? It's a question which I asked myself many times over the last 3 years. And I wanted to find a biblical role model for this. And what's interesting, I found Abraham. See, in chapter 23 of Genesis, Abraham buries Sarah. He's at the age of 137. And God at this point has made to him 3 promises. First of all, that he will inherit the land, the Jewish people will inherit the land of Canaan of Israel. Secondly, that his offspring will be like the stars in the sky and the sand of the sea shore. And thirdly, that he will be the father of many nations. there's a problem. This was pointed out to me by my teacher, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. There is a problem. Not one of these things has been fulfilled. He has not 1 square millimeter of the land of Israel. His son Isaac is not married, he has no grandchildren, has no offspring at all. He has no connection whatsoever with any other peoples in the world. He's not the father of any other nation, not even his own. So he's in crisis, he's in trauma. And Rabbi Sachs points out, asks the question, what does he do? And if you read from chapter 23 onwards, it's absolutely fascinating until the end of Abraham's life. He's 137 years old. The first thing he does is buy a field from the Hittite, and that's the cave of the patriarchs, and that's where he buries Sarah. That's the first piece of land purchased in the land of Israel, and he starts the fulfillment of that promise of God. And then he sends his servant Eliezer to go find a wife for Isaac, and he searches around, he finds Rebecca, they get married, and now he has secured a future for his family and for the Jewish people and for the Christians. And then he remarries at the end of the story, which most people miss, most Jews certainly have missed. He remarries a lady called Keturah, who doesn't feature very much in the biblical narrative. They have 6 sons. I would challenge anyone to have to name them, because I couldn't. But if you look at the names are very Indian names. And the Torah says that he sends them off to the east with gifts. And our rabbis explain the east is India, and the gifts are the Jewish mysticism, the Kabbalah, which was created really by Abraham. What's interesting is, you see, that he basically seeds the Hindu and Buddhist Eastern religions. And it's interesting, you look on Google, which I did, that the origins of Hinduism is 4,000 years ago, exactly the time that Abraham would have been sending his sons out. So basically, Abraham becomes the founder of Eastern religions, of Hinduism, Buddhism. He also, of course, is the founder of Christianity and Islam and Judaism. So effectively today, about 75% of the world's population can trace themselves back to Abraham. He fulfills that. So basically, Abraham understands that when you're in crisis, the job you need to do is to get on and do something. And this was something which I learned as well, that actually when you have trauma, the best thing you could possibly do is find something meaningful to do. I was very lucky because people asked me to speak and people asked me to get involved in different projects in memory of the girls. And so I was automatically thrown into it. I don't know if I would have figured it out myself, but I can tell you something, that if you have trauma, you've been through a bereavement and you're feeling sad, find something to do, possibly for someone else, something that's meaningful to you, because that is going to give you positive energy. It's going to really transform your life. So I, as I say, I was thrown into this activity of speaking, and it got me out of the house. And I realized that actually I was going through a process. And I actually wrote about this process in the book, 7 Facets of Healing, which there are about 2 copies left, but it's available on Amazon. What I realized was after trauma, everything is a trigger. Your friends are a trigger. Your family is a trigger. If I went to a restaurant, which I'd been with the family before, that was a trigger. If I went on my morning walk, that was a trigger. If I was eating food that reminded me of Lucy's cooking or something, that would be a trigger. Everything is a trigger. What happens is the triggers don't go away, but a couple of things happen. First of all, as you go through these things and you're brave enough to encounter them a few more times, the trigger becomes less. But secondly, as time goes on, you're able to differentiate what is triggering you. Because at the beginning, it just seems that everything is life is triggering you. But actually, once you realize that individual things are triggering you, you can actually deal with them one by one. And so I wanted to write about these individual triggers. I thought, what's the best format for this? And I remembered that Lucy and I, when we first were married, used to go on date nights. And what would happen was she would ask me a question, how was your week? And I would say I had a terrible week, my boss was terrible, and after an hour of complaining, that was my answer. And then I'd say to her, how was your week? She'd say, my best friend let me down again, she didn't call me, and she's still going out with some other people, and she didn't invite me, and she had a nag about that. And by the end of it, the mood had completely collapsed, and that was the end of date night. So after a couple of weeks, she said, this is not working. She said, what we need to do is not answer one particular category. We have to answer all the categories of our life. And she divided them up into seven, what you call the seven facets or seven F's: family, friends, fitness, fun, function, which was our job, finance, and faith. And those categories encountered pretty much our whole life. And what we found was, if she said to me, how are you doing? I'd say function, job, not very good. Fun, we're out here tonight for dinner, that's great. Finance is okay. The family, thank God the kids are good. And we go through them, and what you find is that one or two were not so good. Most of them were okay. A couple were really fantastic. And at the end of it, you actually put all your problems in context. So when I was thinking about how to address healing, I thought, okay, these are the categories. So I wanted to give you a few ideas of these categories. Also want to say something that each of the 30 chapters, I talk about the assumption and the reality. Because when you're in trauma, everything that you assume is wrong. This is something strange, because I changed career. I was a private equity investor until the age of 32. There was promoted to the director of $1 billion investment fund. I took my bonus and I quit, and the next day I was on a plane to Israel to become a rabbi. And since then I've done a few other activities as well. And generally speaking, I've sort of felt that I made the right moves forwards. My life has been in progress. It's been a sort of, it seems like a random mix for most people, but for me it made sense. And so I'm quite instinctive, and I work on my instincts. But when the tragedy happened, I realized all my instincts were wrong. I think this is a feature of trauma. It turns all your instincts to be wrong. And the things that you think are going to help you don't help you. And you end up doing things which actually harm you. And I think that there's a reason for this, because we call it Yetzer Hara, our evil inclination, or the Satan, I guess. We have this aspect of us that doesn't want us to heal. It doesn't want us to heal because there's some pleasure in being in trauma, meaning that I can lie in bed, I don't have to go out, I don't have to pray in the morning, I don't have to go to work, nobody's going to blame me if I don't speak to them, I don't have to justify my existence. It's much easier for me to lie in bed and do nothing than to actually get up and do something. Is it? Yeah.
I just said amen.
Yeah, but it's really harmful. I mean, for example, I'll give you a for example. Fun, on the category of fun. We think that when you're after trauma, you have to look sad. You have to be sad, but you also have to look sad. I found this, that actually after the trauma, I was speaking to many different groups, youth groups, Jewish groups, Christian groups. And at the end of it, people would come, they say to me often, can we have a selfie with you at the end? So I stand there, and for the first year, I made an effort not to smile. Even though it's sort of against nature not to smile when you're in a selfie. I thought, if I smile, it's an insult to the memory of Lucy Margarina. How can I be smiling in this year ever, basically? And yet, after about a year, I realized and remembered something which I knew all the time, because I wrote a book about it, my other book that I wrote, about happiness. And I knew that if, not only when you're happy do you smile, but when you smile, you actually feel happier. This is a fact, and you probably all know it, but one of the things that I always do on my morning walks is go around for a few minutes with a wide smile, and it just gives you that feeling of uplift. Now, me not smiling for the year was actually harming me and stopping me from actually feeling better. So I was punishing myself for what, right? But that was what it was. Okay, family. Family is the greatest, it's one of the greatest healers. And I'll give you an assumption and a reality. The assumption would be, for everyone in this room, I imagine, how many of you are probably thinking, I could not survive if I went through what this guy went through. If I lost, God forbid, my wife, my two children, three people who were very close to me, I don't know how I could survive. If you're thinking that, you are the person who's most likely to survive it the best. Okay, this is counterintuitive, paradoxical, but I'll explain why. Because if you love your family so much that you can't believe what you can't imagine what it'd be like to not have them, then you are precisely the person who would have to live afterwards in order to live for the other members of your family who you feel equally strongly towards. And so therefore you are more qualified to survive. And this is something which again is a bit odd. But I'll tell you that on the Friday night after the tragedy, we were in the hospital in Hadassah in Jerusalem. Lucy had been airlifted by helicopter to have 2 bullets removed from her. spine and her brainstem. Sadly, it failed. I couldn't sleep that night because all I could think about was the moment of the attack and what it must have been like. And every time I drifted off a little bit to sleep, I had this terrible nightmare. I woke up and I realized my reality was worse than my nightmare. So this happened multiple times during the night. Saturday, I was awake all day. By Saturday night, I'd been awake almost 48 hours. I realized I can't survive. So I thought, what can I do? And I remembered a teaching on faith from a podcast. I don't know if Victoria has anyone listened to Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg has classes, a podcast on Emunah, on faith. It's been for 10 years, and they're beautiful on Spotify. And I remember something which he said many times, which is, think of the good, not the bad, and be happy. And with that ring in my mind, I thought, okay, I'm not going to think about Lucy, my Rena. I'm going to think about Tali, Karen, and Yehuda, my remaining kids. I did. I slept. I realized that this was the way I was going to survive by thinking about the good. And then I realized, a short while afterwards, that I can count all the terrible things in my life on one hand. And that everybody I know and I meet can also count the number of challenges and traumas you have on one hand. But at the same time, the number of miracles that happen to you every single day is infinite. For example, you get up in the morning, you got up, that's a miracle. You put your feet on the ground, right? You have feet. There are soldiers today in Israel who don't have feet. That's another miracle. The ground exists as it did yesterday. That's another miracle. The gravity worked for you miraculously, exactly as it did yesterday. That's another miracle. You turn on the water to make a cup of coffee. The water comes out. The water system in Dallas costs billions of dollars. The water came out pretty much for free. That's another miracle. You have the coffee. The coffee came from South America. It was planted. It was grown. It was picked. It was roasted. It was processed. It was packaged by 10,000 people, transported by ship to here. And then it was picked up in your supermarket for $10. The milk that you put into your coffee came from a cow that was milked 10 miles away 3 days ago, where somebody got up at 3 in the morning. There's multiple miracles. Transported in a refrigerated lorry to the supermarket, another miracle. Taken in your car, another miracle. Back to your refrigerator, which is another miracle. By the time you've been awake for half an hour, you've experienced hundreds and thousands of miracles. I thought, why is it that God does this for us? Because whatever you're going through in life, you can always choose to look at the good and not the bad. And this really, it really is true. You have a choice. We have a choice. We can look at the good or we can look at the bad. So that's a little bit on the category of family. Category of friends. Again, there's some paradoxes with how to be a friend to someone in trauma. What should you not say to someone who's in trauma? Do not say, "How are you?" Okay, that's a bit of a paradox, because normally we think that was perfectly inane. What is that word? Perfectly harmless. But actually, it's very painful. And any of you who have been through trauma will know this, that when someone says to you, "How are you?" the only answer is fine. And if you're not fine, you don't know what to say, and they put you into an extra degree of trauma trying to think about what you could answer. I learned from, I forget the name, I always get it from Sheryl Sandberg from Facebook. She wrote a book about this Plan B, I think. And the only idea which I took from the book, which was a beautiful idea, was that she said it's okay to say, "How are you today?" Because that expresses the fact, I understand that your general situation is not good, but actually, today might be a better day, which case the person can say, "I'm okay today." Another thing you should not say to someone in trauma: give me a call when you're free. I'd love to see you. Give me a call when you want me to come around. I'd love to see you. Never say that. They will never call you. What you should say is, "I am coming to your house tomorrow at 5 o'clock. Even better, I'm coming to your house every Monday at 5 o'clock. Okay? If they don't want to see you, they won't open the door. But someone who's in trauma will never pick up the telephone to you, and all that your request will do is put a barrier between you and them, because you'll feel, "Why did they not call me?" They'll feel, "Why are they not, why are they angry with me?" And you won't speak to them ever again. So never say to them, "Call me when you want." Never say to them, "Come around for Sunday lunch. Tell me when you're free and you're welcome to come for Sunday lunch." Say to them, "This Sunday we're waiting for you at 12 o'clock. If you don't turn up, we will start eating at 12:30. Okay, you need to manage their lives. And I was very lucky. I live in a community where the people knew this. I learned all this. I had no idea when I went into this, but I have a community in Efrat in Judea where I live, I probably met Rabbi Eli Michelle and others, and truly people who, my neighbors who knew all this, they appointed me as secretary during the 7 days of mourning. And people who wanted to speak to me went to her. She took a list, and every day after this Shiva, the 7 days of mourning, she would tell me who's coming, what time, and I had a whole full diary. I was busy for 6 weeks until I started getting to the point where I could make my own arrangements, and then they were conflicting with her. So I said, I think I'm ready now to take over. But I mean, the idea that you should appoint a secretary for someone who's in trauma, it's just a beautiful thing to do. So there are many creative things you can do for people to help them, but the obvious things are generally not the correct ones. And then, of course, there's faith. Faith is the biggest healer. In the words of Rabbi Ephraim Goldberg, faith is a muscle. If you exercise it when you don't need it, it will be there for you when you do. So, when something good happens to you and everything in your life is going well, you say, thank God. That is faith. That's saying that came from God. It didn't come from me. And that means that when something not so good happens, you could say, okay, that also came from God. But if you didn't flex your muscles in the good times, they won't be there for you in the less good times. And so that's something which helped me tremendously. I'm somebody who's worked on this for many, many years. And after the tragedy, people said to me, Rabbi, what if you hadn't gone to live in Israel? What if you left half an hour later on the morning of the tragedy? What if you hadn't sold your 7-seater car 2 months before the tragedy, you'd all been driving together and you'd all taken the other route? What if? Now, it might sound very painful that people ask me these questions, but it was less painful than you think. Because every question they asked me, I'd already asked myself 1,000 times before. And this is a nature of trauma. This is a nature of also when we question ourselves, if we made the wrong decision in life, or if something terrible happens, we ask ourselves, what if? And there are so many different possibilities. We can spend our whole time getting anxious and thinking what it could have been and so forth. After a while, I realized very quickly that it is forbidden to ask what if, because whatever happens in life, only one thing ever happens. And there are an infinite number of possibilities of things that could happen, but they didn't happen. And so after a while, I said to people, it's forbidden to ask what if. There's only what if that you have to ask. What if God planned it this way? What if I was always meant to be married to Lucy for 25 years and then I was not? What if I was meant to be a father of 5 until April the 7th, 2023, and then a father of 3? And what if that was the cards that God served me? And my job is to live with that and to live through it and work through it, because that's my life. And somebody else has a divorce, and they think, what if I'd done it differently? No, what if God planned it? It was always going to be that. That was always going to be the outcome. And your job is to say, okay, now it's time to move on. God is giving me another opportunity, a second opportunity. And that's a very different perspective. And I have to say that was something which really helped me at the time. Something else that helped me. One Shabbat, one Sabbath, a year after the tragedy, I was by myself. Up until then, 1, 2, or 3 of my kids had always been home for Shabbat. And then suddenly Tali, my 20-year-old, was out in the Air Force, where she's a mission controller for F-15 pilots flying over Iran. Karen was out on national service, where she was looking after kids from very difficult backgrounds, being almost like a mother to them for 2 years. And my son Yehuda was out at his high school for Shabbat. So I was by myself. So I immediately invited myself to 2 friends for Friday night dinner and for Saturday lunch. But for the third meal, which we do Saturday afternoon, I intentionally did not make any arrangements. I came home to an empty house and I cried. I cried for half an hour. And at the end of it, I thought to myself, why are you crying? And it may seem obvious because I'm at home alone, I've come back to an empty house, but I've been home at an empty house multiple times during the year and I hadn't cried. And I thought to myself, I'm crying because I'm alone on Shabbat. It's the first time in 30 years that I've been alone on Shabbat, and I don't want to be alone on Shabbat. And then a question popped up in my mind, and a voice said, what can you do about it? And I answered myself, I need to get remarried. And even though the solution could have been a decade away, the pain went away, and the tears stopped, and I felt lifted. And I just felt I returned to normal. And I learned a number of things from this. I learned, number one, pain is a blessing. What causes the pain, it's hard to describe as a blessing, but actually in the world to come, I think we'll discover that even that was a blessing. But once you have pain, whatever causes it, the pain is always a blessing. For example, great-grandmother has a headache. She goes to the doctor, they discover that she's got a tumor, she has it removed, she has another 20 years of life. God forbid, great-grandmother has the same tumor without the headache, and we know that the prognosis would not be as good. So the pain comes to tell you to do something. And the pain in my case came to tell me that I had to do something. And we all have pain. We have sadness, we have days we don't want to get out of bed. Sometimes we feel no one would miss us if we didn't do something today. Sometimes we feel that our life is meaningless, whatever is causing it. As long as we ask ourselves the question, why am I feeling like this? It is a blessing. Because if it's because I feel my life is meaningless, then it's time to start volunteering and doing something for someone else. And I'm sure Dr. Victoria and can suggest to you many different things that one can do. If it's because you feel people aren't missing you, then perhaps it's time to join another activity or a sports activity or a social activity and make yourself part of that group, whatever it is. But if you ask yourself the question, you're already on the path to healing. Any case, I started dating after that. What happens in our community is that there are matchmakers call you up and say, how about you meet this one, you meet that one? So I went to about 30 dates. One of the ladies that I met, I sat in a restaurant opposite her for the first date. And she said, Leo, I'm suffering trauma from my divorce 10 years ago. So I said, I'm very sorry. Actually, I realized afterwards that Lisa pointed out to me that most of the women that I dated at the beginning were all talking about, all they wanted to talk about was trauma, because that was my topic. I was happy to talk about trauma as well at the time, because that was what I was interested in. But it's not a good basis for a relationship. But I only realized that when I met Lisa, and we didn't talk about trauma for the first 10, 20 days. But in any case, so she said, I'm suffering trauma from my divorce 10 years ago. I said, what are you doing about it? She said, I'm going to therapy. I said, what type of therapy? She said, it's Eastern therapy. I said, what's that? She said, Buddhist therapy. I said, what is that? She said, they teach you to live in the now. There is no past, there is no future, there's just the now. So I chuckled to myself because I just heard a podcast from a rabbi I follow in America, Rabbi Jacobson, who quoted the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who said, there is no present, there's only the past and the future. This was our last date, but he justified it. He said, look, if I'm talking about the now, I said, the now I'm talking about is already the past. If I'm talking about something that's about to happen in the moment, that's the future. The amount of time which is now is a razor-thin moment, doesn't really exist. Perhaps it's the moment we choose whether we want to live in the past or in the future. So anyway, I turned to this woman and I said to her, I said, look, you believe in the now. I said, and you believe in your pain, and it's now. I said, if you have pain and you only believe it now, it exists in the now, there's nowhere for it to go. I said, you can sit on the floor, cross your arms, go for 3 hours. You can numb the pain, but guaranteed it's going to come straight back. And then you're going to go back to the therapist next week, and great business for the therapist, not great business for you. I said, however, if you understand there is no now, there's just the past and the future. I said, then you can take the pain, you can address it occasionally, you can stick it in a box, put it on a shelf, call it the past, and then you can turn over to the future, which is a white sheet of paper, and you can choose to write whatever you want on that piece of paper. I said, that's what I plan to do. And that was our last date. And thank God, a few days later, I met Elisa, and together we're writing our own story together on this white sheet of paper. So these are a few tips of the types of things we can do during trauma. I recommend my book if you're interested to learn more about it. But I went going back to Abraham. How did Abraham know what his job was? And how did he know that things were going to get better? He knew because God spoke to him directly. Now, we don't have, most of us don't have God's voice in our ears, although I'm sure the Savardis probably do. But we most of us human beings don't have God's speaking directly in our ear. But we have something that Abraham didn't have, a book. And that book is the Bible. Amen. Yeah, that's the book is the Bible. And the Bible tells us what we're meant to do and tells us the story of our lives. And I think that actually, we can look at the Bible, we can see a fascinating theme. Right? There's one theme that comes out really out of the 5 books of Moses, which is the story of a people who fall to the lowest level of degradation. They are slaves. Any moment more, they're also going to be idol worshippers in the biggest empire in the world. And if that's the case, they're both slaves and idol worshippers, then their culture will be consumed, which is what's happened to thousands of cultures over the years. And that culture will disappear, and that will be the end of the story. But instead, at the last minute, God picked us up from Egypt, and 7 weeks later, Pentecost, Passover, he picks us up, and 7 weeks later on Pentecost, he puts us at Mount Sinai, gives us the Torah, the greatest moment in the history of mankind. We went from the bottom of the pit of humanity to the greatest moment in the history of mankind, the only time when God appears to a whole people in one moment, and that was at Mount Sinai. And so I think we can see from this that there is a pattern in history, that the message is that whenever something happens which is so tragic, that is the beginning of a process of redemption that will end up in complete redemption. And I think that is what's happening today. So again, moving on to the current situation, the 7th of October. 7th of October was the greatest disaster in Jewish history in the last 80 years. I would go further to say that actually it was a humanitarian disaster, and probably one of the greatest humanitarian disasters of all time. And if that sounds like a contradiction, I'll explain it. Obviously, in numbers, the Holocaust was far more severe, but there was one quality of the October the 7th, which I think should leave a very bad taste in the mouths of everyone in this room and everyone on this planet. You see, during the Holocaust, our enemies pretended, tried to hide what they were doing. And then other nations who knew what was going on pretended they didn't know, and at the end of the war pretended to be upset to discover that 6 million Jews were miraculously missing. That was one story. But on the 7th of October, that didn't happen. Our enemies publicized this on live Facebook, live television, people watching it live all over the world, and some people were dancing and singing and celebrating in real time. I believe this to be the first genocide ever to be broadcast live and celebrated in real time. And I hope that it's the last. But for that reason, I think it's a low point, not just for the Jewish people, it's a low point for humanity. And if that's the case, if we take the theme of the Bible, which is the story of a people who fall to the bottom and rise up to the top, I think we can see that what's happening in the world now is if humanity hits rock bottom, humanity is about to rise to a complete redemption. If we have any doubts that that's what God has in mind for us, he's got his fingerprints all over the whole story. You see, it took place on the 7th of October, 2023, which was the festival of Simchat Torah. You celebrate Simchat Torah? Okay, I do everything here, right? It's a day that we open the Torah afresh, and we finish the 52-week cycle of reading different portions of the Torah, and we finish the Torah, and we start again reading from Genesis 1. And God was saying to us on the 7th of October, to all of humanity, I am starting a new world. The world you're in on 7th of October is not the world you're in on the 6th of October and before. And this was a blessing. I can tell you it was a blessing because after 30 days of mourning was finished for my wife and my daughters, I turned to my kids and I said to them, we are starting a new world. We were in world number 1 with 2 parents and 5 kids. We're in world number 2 now with 1 parent and 3 kids. We've had 30 days of tears, of suffering and crying, but actually we're going to start a new world, and this world is going to be good, it's going to be fun, it's going to be happy, with memories of world number 1, but no other connection. And that was something which really helped us, and God was saying to all of humanity, you're starting a new world. Now, if you look at what the first words God speaks in the Bible are, he says, let there be light. Okay, now the sun is created on day 4 of creation. So what light is God referring to on day 1? Good question, right? Ever thought about that? And by the way, the Bible says, and there was light. So what light was that?
His light.
Right, so his light, God's light. So I put it in different words. I think it was the light of truth, the light that distinguishes between good and evil. And every day of 6 days of creation, God says, and it was good, and it was very good, or it was not good, right? So in other words, apparently during the 6 days of creation, it was very clear to everybody, which was just God at the time, it was very clear to everybody what was good and what was not good. Since then, it's not been so clear because our lives are a mixture of good and evil and things mixed together, and we have to figure it out. And sometimes it's very difficult, and we can never really work out exactly clearly what's right and what's wrong. until the 7th of October, the second time in history that God switched on the light. And suddenly we saw the light of truth, and we saw absolute evil and absolute good. We saw absolute evil because people were marching down the streets of London, Paris, New York, and Sydney screaming, "Kill the Jews" on the 7th of October. And thank God. Why do I say thank God? Because not one anti-Semite was created on the 7th of October. Every anti-Semite who existed on the 7th of October was also an anti-Semite on the 6th of October, but we couldn't see them. And suddenly God switched on the light, and suddenly these people come out the cobwebs, and they're wearing their green bandanas, waving their hands, saying, "I'm an anti-Semite, I hate Jews, I hate Christians, I hate the West, I want to destroy society. Look at me." So this is
Paid for by Donald Trump.
Okay, so that's okay. So this is a blessing. It's a blessing because we, Jews around the world, can see who lives in the societies. I think Christians around the world can see who lives in their societies. Because of that, in your country, you chose a new administration because people were fed up with these people marching down the street or just being in society, and people want to do something about it. Other countries also changing administration. Only Britain and Canada chose the same administration, but that's because they're not very bright, but they might change their mind in the future. This is what's happening. The world is changing because of the light of truth. But we also saw absolute good since the 7th of October. What does absolute good look like when God switches on the light? It looks like open miracles. We have seen open miracle after open miracle since October the 7th. We saw thousands of missiles coming over from Iran. Every single one could destroy 700 apartments and kill 2,000 people. We know that because one of them hit Bat Yam in Tel Aviv, and it destroyed 700 apartments and would have killed 2,000 people if they hadn't been in the safe rooms. And there were enough missiles that came over in the last 2.5 years to kill every person in Israel and destroy every home in Israel more than once. And yet that did not happen, thank God. That's an open miracle. There's no explanation for that. And if you say the Iron Dome, then I want you to bear in mind 2 points. Number one, there's only one country in the world that has Iron Dome coverage of its whole country, and that's Israel. America would love to have it, but they'd have to fish out $500 billion in order to just have partial coverage, and they're not going to do that in the near future. And the second thing is that Israel shot out the sky more missiles in the past 2.5 years than the rest of humanity in the history of time. There is nothing normal about that. It's hitting a bullet with a bullet in outer space. So that is number one. Number two, the pages miracle, right? I mean, these things just came so quickly that we just forgot about them. The pages miracle, many rabbis at the time likened it to the plague of the firstborn. The only parallel in history was the plague of the firstborn, because the firstborn in Egypt was the soldier, the terrorist, the one who would be in the army, and God picks them out around every table in Egypt, and there are no civilian casualties. Since then, nobody's ever tried to attack 5,000 Hezbollah terrorists without any civilian casualties, except the pager attack, which Israel had planned for 10 years before. That's an open miracle. There's no logical way to explain that. I guarantee they will not be studying it at West Point in the same way they didn't study the Six-Day War in West Point, because there's nothing normal or natural about those victories. And then we saw the return of 20 live hostages. Nobody expected it, not Trump, not Bibi, not the parents. It was just completely unexpected, and that was an open miracle. Then we saw the destruction of Iran in June, and the continued destruction of Iran since then. My daughter, as I said, is mission control for F-15 pilots. She's 20 years old in Tel Nof Air Base, and she's doing that for 2 years. She's now the most senior person there. So they called her back and told her she had to work on Shabbat, which she's done many times during this war. And after that Shabbat was a particular Sabbath where we have to hear a particular reading. There's one reading a year that you have to hear, which is about the destruction of Amalek, because in the Bible it says you have to hear it, remember it, don't forget it. So the rabbis understand that means you have to read it out, everyone has to hear it, and men, women, and children come to synagogue that Shabbat to hear it. And I called her up after the Shabbat, and I said, and Tali said to me, Dan, I'm really sorry I didn't get to hear the Torah portion this week. I said, Tali, we were reading about the destruction of Amalek. You were actually operating it. And it was true. The other thing I say about Tali is that they did a joint training exercise with the American Air Force 6 months ago. and she met her parallel in the American Air Force. He was a 45-year-old lieutenant. I said at the time, I said, the only difference between Tally and this lieutenant is that Tally had far more operational experience than this guy will ever have. So this is what's happening in Israel. In any case, we've had miracle after miracle after miracle, not to mention the miracles of this country, right? I mean, I think, I love Donald Trump. I think he's doing a tremendous job, but we'll have to remember that in 2005, The Simpsons had a spoof episode about the most ridiculous candidate for president you could possibly have, and that featured Donald Trump. So God has a sense of humor because he has become the president twice and done a very good job, but nobody would have imagined it. And then he was subject to assassination attempts, one of which put a bullet past his ear. He stood up after that. He said, I think I've been chosen by God for a particular purpose. I'm not going to tell you what it is. And then a few months later, he's attacking Iran and destroying evil in a way that none of the advisors would advise him to do. And it's going to set up a world war, and it's going to set off a world recession. And it's not set off a world war, and it's not set off a world recession. He's breaking every possible paradigm. He's doing what he's doing. And this is just, again, it's miraculous. Then you look in New York. New York is the biggest population of Jews for any city and the most capitalist city in the world. And they just elected a mayor who's an anti-Semite and a communist, right? So God has a sense of humor because, frankly, it couldn't be any by natural means that this was happening. Any case, I want to talk about at this point, what is the point of all this? What's happening at the moment? I think if we had to name the world we were in October the 6th, if we say we're in the world of exile, if we had to name the world we started October 7th, the name I would give is the Messianic era. According to our sources, the Messianic era begins when Israel is no longer under the thumb of her enemies, and we've destroyed Hamas, Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, Houthis. All the enemies are being destroyed one by one. We are in the war to destroy evil. With the help of your president and your army that we pray for, by the way, every week in our synagogue in Efrat. We're in incredible times. What does it mean? Well, according to all the prophets, what happens at this point in history is that all Jews have to return home, which means it's a blessing for Jews to come home. It also means that it's a little bit of a curse for Jews who remain outside of Israel at this point in history. That seems to be what's happening, and therefore God is making all this anti-Semitism, I think, in order to encourage people, Jews, to come home. And Jews are meant to be a light unto the nations. The question is, are Jews a light unto the nations in Israel? I mean, not here, but in Israel. So I don't know if you've ever come across Douglas Murray. Douglas Murray is an English journalist who has been very pro-Israel the last 2.5 years of the war, non-Jewish guy, Christian. And he was at the ARC conference. I don't know if you ever go to the ARC conference in London. It's a conference about the sustainability of Western civilization. And it takes quite a few right-wing people together to discuss how we're going to survive. And he stood up in front of 4,000 non-Jewish people in London, and he made the following speech. He said, there's only one country in the world where the youth understand the culture and live the culture and believe in the culture enough in order to fight with their lives to defend it, and that's Israel. Yeah. If we in Europe and Britain and America don't follow in their example, we will not survive. And he got a standing ovation from 4,000 people at this conference. I think that counts a little bit as a likeness to the nations. Then I saw a news broadcast, a press release from the head of NATO and the head of the British forces in Britain and the head of NATO in Europe. It was a couple of years ago when the war started, and they made the following quite alarming announcement, which wasn't really followed up in the news at the time. They said, Europe is going to be subject to attack by China, Russia, and/or Iran over the next year, 2, 3, 5. And we need to make 3 changes to our society in the West. Number 1, we have to spend more money on defense. Number 2, we have to have conscription. And number 3, we need a change in culture. And so everyone was thinking, so we're thinking about it. I thought, wow, what's he saying? He says, if countries in Europe have to spend 20% of their budget on defense, that's like Israel. Because at the moment they're spending 5%. They'll have to spend 20%, they'll have to be more like Israel. So basically he's saying, we have to be more like Israel. And then he said, conscription. There's only one Western country that has conscription for men and women today, and that is Israel. And if you had conscription today in any of these Western countries, presumably it has to be for men and women. Basically, they're saying we have to be more like Israel. And when he said we have to have a change of culture, nobody understood what he meant until they released 2 weeks later some research where they interviewed Gen Z in Britain and asked them, would you be prepared to fight for your country? And 83% said, no way at all. And what they meant was, if we're going to survive, we need to have a change of culture so that people are more like Israel. So I think Israel is ticking the box of being a light unto the nation at the moment. But the question I ask is, how does this happen? How did it happen? And how is it happening that Israel has created a sustainable nation in the current situation? By the way, the economy is growing. It's growing 3.5% this year, more than America, more than Europe, more than any Western country in America. This in the world, this is in the middle of a war. So something that's going on in Israel, which is really quite incredible. So I want to suggest to you that the Bible commands us to build a strong nation from bottom up. Okay, it's a grassroots process, right? Religion is grassroots. What you're doing here is a tremendous light unto the nations, because this is grassroots. People doing things here, you are making more change than the people at the top. People at the top getting all the credit, but actually people who are working together at the bottom are really the ones who make the impact. So the Bible teaches us about strong individuals. It teaches us about King David, it teaches us about Joshua, it teaches us about Moses and about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, all the characters of Jesus and the disciples. It teaches us about how to be strong in your views and how to be a strong person. I recently heard a podcast, and it was a Christian writer, and he was asked the question, why is it that so many of the young people, young white kids in this country, in America, are becoming radicalized? Either they're going towards Tucker Carlson to the right, or they're going to the left, but they become radicalized. He said because they've been told 20, 30 years ago that they are meaningless, that their life is meaningless, that everybody else's society is more important, that women are more important, minorities are more important. And so that your basic white kid who's between 18 and 25 thinks, has been told he's useless, and therefore he's looking for some other outlet, he's looking for some extremism, and that's the problem. So he was asked the question, what can you do about it? And he said the following, and it really inspired me. He said, number one, every 18, 25-year-old, every boy in this country should be taught a dangerous sport, okay? Because they should be taught to be strong men. So number two, he said, they should be able to walk into a church and see role models of other strong men who are there sitting in church. He said, number three, he said, they should be taught values, family values, so that they're not just sleeping with anybody, they're actually choosing a wife who's got good moral values, and they're going to build a family and have kids and bring them up with certain values. And he said they should take responsibility and so forth in society. That's what he said, and that was his answer. That Friday night, I went to my synagogue in Efrat. I don't know if you've been to Efrat. Yeah, did you go to Shlomo Katz's synagogue on Friday night? If not, you'll have to come and stay. Honestly, stay with us. And Friday night in Shlomo Katz's synagogue, it's a dancing and singing. It's full of energy. It's beautiful. I turned out, I looked around. 60% of the boys on my side of the synagogue were under the age of 25. Half of them had guns. My daughter's fiance was with me. He has a machine gun because he's in special forces. The ones who are over 22, generally, many of them are married, and one or two of them even had kids on their laps. And I'm thinking to myself, this is the role model for what this guy said. This is the type of boy that we need in America, that we need all over the world. We need some role models who are prepared to fight for their country, who are strong with dangerous sports. So the Bible teaches us about strong individuals. It also teaches about strong families. We teach our kids from the age of 3 Bible. I think you know, I know from speaking very briefly with Dr. Victoria and with Paul, their kids have been brought up beautifully with wonderful values, and I'm sure people here as well. But if you send them to Christian schools, they get good biblical stories. Every story has a moral value. So it's not just fairy tales, but it's actually everything has a really strong moral value, and they're learning morality from day one. But if you don't have that, you end up with a situation that we saw in Harvard and Columbia and Yale, where these people who are super intelligent, apparently, and super educated, can't tell the difference between a genocide and self-defense. They can't tell the difference between a man and a woman. And this is a problem, a moral problem, because we're not bringing up our kids in this way. Something which I know that I'm a great fan of Charlie Kirk. I don't know if there's a good person to mention in this crowd or not, but I love Charlie. My book, Seven Facets, I dedicate to him as well. He wrote the book about the Sabbath. And, if there's one thing about the Sabbath, which is really important, is turning off your phone. And I recommend to everybody anyway, just to do it for one day. If it's not Saturday, it can be Sunday, doesn't matter, but 25 hours where everybody around the family knows, or at least they're going to meal, they leave their phones behind. Because the quality of conversation and the relationship you build is just unbelievable. There's actually a nice Hasidic story about a king and his wise man and a nation. And what happens is there's a famine, and the only food that's left is basically a hallucinogen. I know it's like marijuana or something. That's the only food that's left. And everyone's eating and they're all going mad. And the king has the last supply of food and his wise man. And the king realizes he's going to have this as well. But he's worried about going mad. So he says to the wise man, what can we do? And the wise man says, you put a black dot on your forehead. I'll put a black on my forehead. Then we'll eat it. And at least when we look at each other, we'll remember that we're mad. And I always thought about the story. I thought it was a beautiful story, but what did it mean? And then I can tell you, because when the war broke out, I started looking on my phone, social media, TikTok and Telegram, all these things, until my 17-year-old son actually limited my phone. So now I only get literally 10 minutes on each of them, which is very healthy. But in any case, you get addicted to hearing the news, particularly when you're in the middle of a war. And I was really worried. I used to be very stressed, and also I knew that it was all lies. Social media is all lies. But when I switched my phone off 25 hours on a Sabbath, I suddenly just was able to calm down. By the time I came back after the Sabbath, I remembered that this was all lies. And then by the end of the week, you're thinking it's really true, and then you turn it off, and then you realize it's not. So in the Bible, it actually says that this Shabbat is a sign. God will give us such that the Sabbath is a sign. 6 days you shall work, 7th day you shall rest, whatever. What's it mean, a sign? So I think the sign, that's the story. The sign is on your black dot on your forehead. The Sabbath is what gives you the ability to realize you're mad. That's what it does. Okay. Once you have 25 hours off, you can actually realize you're mad. So strong families is a biblical value. By the way, Israel has the highest number of kids per family in the West. Every other country in the Western nations, OECD, America, Europe, etc., has less than 1.8 number of kids, I think, per mother. Israel is 3. It's the only Western country that has more than 2. And it shows that people in Israel have confidence about the future. They want to bring kids into the world. We have big families, thank God. And it's something which, again, is a light unto the nations. This is something that we should all be, every Christian family should be aspiring that the kids should get married, have kids, and as many as possible. What about community? Community is another biblical value. Okay, again, once you have a strong individual and you have strong families, then you could build strong communities. And strong community is the ability to come together on a Sunday at 2 o'clock and to talk about different ideas and share ideas, meet each other, for your friends to meet each other, and just to grow community. Where does the idea of a church come from? So the synagogue is modeled upon the tabernacle in the Bible. The church, which I believe in Greek is called the Ecclesias, which means a meeting house. By the way, in Hebrew, Beit Knesset, a synagogue, is a meeting house. The church is called the Ecclesias, which means a meeting house, and the mosque is modeled on the church. And basically every religious building in the world now is based on the Bible. So community is a biblical concept. I want to just end on this note, and then we'll maybe take some questions. My Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, told me once about the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. It's a book that he'd read, and he said the pattern goes and repeats itself in history. What happens is you have a big empire, successful, wealthy empire, and then you have a bunch of poor, cohesive group of people with a innovation in warfare. They come along and they attack the empire. They win. They take over the empire. What happens is that over time they become wealthy, and their family structure breaks down. They can't tell the difference between men and women, and they don't have kids anymore. They don't have enough people to fight in the army, and they become complacent. And then they're wide open to attack from the next group of poor, cohesive, society with an innovation of warfare. And he said this about 20 years ago, and I heard immediately what he was talking about. He was talking about the Western Empire is at that point of complacency, of lack of cohesion, people not having kids, and there's not enough people to fight. No one in Britain is going to fight in the army in this country, except in Dallas, people will not be fighting the army. And this is where we are. We are literally at the borderline of destruction of this empire, and goodness knows what's going to happen next. In order to survive, the West has to emulate Israel. The light, Israel has to be the light of the nations. Now, Christians say to me, when I've said this to Christians, they say, well, what's our role? Let me tell you something. We're 15 million people, and we should all be in Israel. At the moment, 7.6, more than half are in Israel. Very soon, the rest of us will be in Israel as well, 15 million Jews in Israel. I'll just be a light as basically a prototype of how you create a modern, cohesive, sustainable nation. But that leaves you behind, right? And this is a country with 350 million people. I don't know how many Christians there are, but certainly Zionist Christians who actually read the Bible and understand what it means. They're not such a great number. Your job is to be a light unto your nation, okay? To take those ideas, biblical ideas that we've proven in Israel, and your job is to spread that light to everybody in this country. So our job is 15 million people to create the prototype. Your responsibility is the other 8 billion people on this planet. It's a much bigger problem. And we hand it over to you, but it really is a serious problem. It's a serious challenge, and this is what you need to do. And I want to just throw, if I may, with your permission, throw a challenge over to you in this room, and maybe I'll ask you a question. Qatar, I think, is spending $6 billion a year at the moment trying to brainwash your kids on campus in America. China is spending $5 billion a year trying to brainwash your kids on campus. They're doing a great job, by the way, because the majority of 18 to 25-year-olds in this country hate Israel, hate Christianity, hate America, and frankly would vote to do everything to destroy it. They killed Charlie Kirk, okay, because they saw what he was doing on campus was the opposite. He was the only person, in my opinion, I saw who was actually spreading genuine biblical values to students in a way that was really appealing to them. And in the same way, if I may say, the Romans killed Jesus because they saw that as a big empire, he was the biggest threat to them. But now, who would have thought this one guy, in Israel at the time, would be the greatest threat to this mighty Roman Empire? But actually, 300, 400 years later, Constantine proves they were absolutely right, because where a good idea is the biggest threat to evil. So this is where we're at. In the end, it's the Bible that always brings down evil. The Bible is the most autonomous book in the world. I'll just tell you something. I'm on a committee of ex-hostages and bereaved families in Israel. It's paid for by some American Jewish committee, and it's funded. They want to create a project to create greater unity in Israel. They thought that the voices of people like myself and the hostages would be able to come out and create a unified message for Israeli people. I don't know where it's going to go, but one of the sessions we had was with one hostage being in a hostage 2 years. And we were all asked the question, what is the biggest barrier to unity in Israel, or a question that you can't answer, that you'd like to have the answer to? And his question was, I don't know where it came from, I think he was a little bit left-wing, but whatever, his question was a question. He said, why is it that some people in this country have to lord it over, have to control other people? Right? Why is it they feel that their job is to sort of dominate other people? And I heard the question, and I vaguely understood where it was coming from, but I said to him, I said, your question is wrong. I said, it's the opposite. I said, your question should be, why is it there are some people who don't feel it necessary to lord over other people in this country? I said, because if you look at the world, you've got China, 1.5 billion people. You've got Russia, you've got Iran, you've got every Muslim country in the Middle East. You've got all of Africa mostly, you've got most of Asia, right? Most of the world is totalitarian regimes. There's no freedom. There's no person free. You have a small bunch of people who want to lord over everybody else, and everybody else has no freedom. They're all basically slaves. I said, and then you have a small handful, America, Europe, Britain, maybe Canada, Australia, and South Africa, whatever, of sort of westernized countries where there is a concept of freedom at the moment. I said, you should ask the question, why is it there are those countries that don't have that totalitarian structure? And I said, the one thing they have in common is that those countries historically went by the Bible, by Israel as well, right? If you have the Bible, that is your only protection for freedom, and you can have the best liberal democracy in the world, and you can see how useless it is when it falls apart and people don't care. And actually, I saw also I listened to Sam Harris, who's actually a very intelligent guy. I know he's a Democrat, and I don't agree with politics, but he's very smart, has interesting people on his podcast. And he asked the San Jose mayor, I think, who's standing to be California governor, I don't know the politics of it all. And he asked, what are the biggest issues in California? And he said two things. And these, Sam is a Jewish, but he's actually a Buddhist. He's atheist. This guy's an atheist as well. So we've got two liberal atheists discussing politics, which is fascinating. So he said the two biggest issues in California are, number one, he said drugs. He said we're giving drug kits to people in order to clean it up, but it's actually encouraging more people to take drugs, and it's not working. He said number two, he said we've got lots of wealthy people in Silicon Valley, and they're not paying tax because basically worked out how to put everything offshore, and so they're not paying any tax. So we've got no money, and the drug situation is out of control. And they sat there for 20 minutes and discussed it, and they said, there's nothing, we haven't got an answer for it. And I thought to myself, we religious people, we have an answer for this, right? Religion is what would solve both those problems. First of all, you wouldn't have such a big drug problem, hopefully, if you had stronger individuals, stronger families, stronger communities. If somebody takes drugs, you can create an institution, you can build it, you can send them, you can care about them, they feel part of something, they have meaning. They're not going to be so many drug takers in communities where people care. And number two, as far as billionaires concerned, of course you can't legislate on billionaires paying tax. But if you're a Christian, if you're a Jew, and you believe in doing good, right, then you're going to put your hand in your pocket and you're going to do good. And we see that with many people who do that. But that's because they have religious values. It's not because the government tells them to pay X% tax. It's because they actually want to. The Bible is this autonomous document. It's one that gives us all the right to choose. But you cannot run a country without it, because you can have whatever rules you want, but you'll never get people to behave, because people always find loopholes. So the only possible free society is what we shall find. So my question I'm throwing out to you, with all seriousness, is how do we get our youth back to Christian biblical values and save this nation? Because if you don't do that, this nation hasn't got another generation, because the next generation coming up hate this nation. They hate freedom and they hate the Bible.
Yeah. A lot of people don't realize this, but in the big beautiful bill that was signed by President Trump. Oh. Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that in the big beautiful bill that was signed by President Trump, it includes the scholarship tax credit. Now, 26 years ago, I wrote it for Florida and Pennsylvania. And 16 years later, when Donald Trump ran for president in November 2016, there were over 160,000 kids in both of those states who were receiving scholarships. And the parents of those kids switched from voting Democrat to Republican. And it helped take President Trump over the top in both of those two narrowly won states that were both must-win states. So the scholarship tax credit is actually about to become in effect throughout the entire country, which is going to allow for every church to start a school.
Okay, that's good. Okay.
And that's what's happening.
I think that sounds like a great long-term approach. The question is for these kids who are on campus at the moment, who can replace Charlie Kirk? Are there people? I haven't come across them. And is there an organization there that's can send inspirational speakers, Christian speakers to these campuses in order to inspire these kids to answer their questions in the same way that Charlie Kirk was? Because if not, these people will be running the country in about the next 10 years, 10, 15 years. And, Qatar and China basically funded exactly the culture that they want for these kids, and they're winning. That's my concern. See, I think, we are totally aligned. I think as Jews in Israel and as Americans, all we want is to return to biblical values, right? I don't think this is fair to say, but my understanding is that Christianity in the last 30 years has taken a massive hit. I went to Christian school. My parents weren't so religious at the time, and I was sent to a Christian school. And I remember my friends went to church. That was quite normal at that time. I don't know anyone in England now who goes to church. More people go to mosque in England every week than Christians go to church. And Muslims are only 10-15% of the population. That shows you what's happened to Christianity. And that is a disaster. That's what's happening to the culture of Britain. It's been attacked because Christians have lost their faith. I think that's anyway. That was my, anyway, you can ask me questions and you can under that one.
Message from the.
Okay, I've got I can maybe send Victoria. I was 10 days ago at the Memorial Day for at Har Herzl, at the Mount Herzl, for bereaved families in the presence of Bibi Netanyahu and the President Herzog. And as he walked towards me, I said to him, I'm going to Dallas. I'm planning to speak to Christians. Do you have a message that I can record for the Christians? So I'll show you the video. As you see, that the cameraman couldn't get close to BB enough to hear what he said, but I put my hand on his shoulder. It was taken off by the security guard. He said his message to you was, he said, we love you, Christians. We are fighting the same war as you're fighting. And that's it. We love your president. We love you people, and we're on the same side. That was his message. Any questions?
Yeah, that last one didn't count as my question.
Okay.
So I have a biblical question,
Yeah.
and also have a military and political question. So which would you rather?
A biblical question.
A biblical question? Okay. What do your Jewish friends say about Psalms chapter 22:6? Where David says, writes, I am Lord. Are you familiar with that verse?
Tell me the verse, because I have to say Christians.
Oh, I didn't-
Christians are like chapter and verse much more effectively than Jews.
Does somebody have a Bible?
In fact, number system is invented by Christians. We use those systems.
Yes.
But I am. It says, so I am a wild of man, it's more than you want, despised by people. Okay? Okay, so
We have that.
I guess this is a statement of humility, although I have to tell you something. I heard from again Rabbi from Goldberg, who's a great friend of, who says that humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So he says, for example, if Muhammad Ali, or whoever it was, says, I'm not a good boxer, that's not humility, that's just lie, right? But if he says, I'm the greatest, thank God, that is humility, because it's saying, it didn't come from me, it came from God. So I don't, that statement there seems to be an anomaly.
Okay, I have the verse, Psalm chapter 22. Let's start in verse 1, so we can get the
He
context.
just read it.
They
They read it up here.
Yeah, we just
Oh,
commented.
That's why he was commenting on.
Thank you.
Oh,
So thank you. Anyone else?
well, but the question was though, that's when it says I am a worm, it's not the traditional Hebraic word for worm, it's a crimson worm. And are you familiar with the crimson worm, or are the Jewish scholars familiar with the crimson word? Because that's the actual word in Psalms 22:6 is the crimson worm. The crimson worm actually attaches itself to the wood, and the mother dies for the children. The children eat the remains of the mother, so there's sacrifice. And it leaves a crimson stain, a red stain on the wood. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Okay, well, now you are.
Okay.
Okay, it's a fascinating text.
Okay.
Okay,
Next question.
Okay, thank you very much. It's not really a question as it is more of an observation or comment. As I look at what's happening right now in Israel, and I see the young people really starting to go back to Torah, and they're getting really fired up after October 7th. And this is what I'm hearing from so many people, surge or resurgence of faith. Well, in America, we haven't had such disasters. We haven't had such challenge. And it's in the distress that Isaiah 26 says that we learn righteousness. And so I believe that the Jewish young people have been learning righteousness through the distress. I mean, after so many things that have happened, like 9/11 or some of these other catastrophes here in the United States, we would see a resurgence of faith where people would go back to churches again, and that we could talk about God in public, and we would sing, God Bless America at baseball games, and and everybody was good, and you could talk in the grocery store about the Lord. Ask if I could pray with somebody, and they would definitely receive it. So I think it's when everything's going so great, we're asleep.
It's a very interesting question, and absolutely right. And actually something which in Israel we're struggling with, because we had this tragedy on October 7th. It brought people together. As you know, on October the 8th, everyone in Israel picked up without any instruction whatsoever and did something towards the war effort. There were people who were just providing food to soldiers on the front line, who turned up without equipment, without food. There were people who were resettling homeless people who'd come from the south or from the northern borders when they had to move to new homes. They were providing logistics and furniture and everything for them for free. And everybody jumped in and did something to support. And there was no coordination, just as like a sort of instinct. And the challenge we have is actually now that things are actually getting much better, is how do we recreate that feeling of unity? I call it, how do we recreate the October the 8th Jew or the October the 8th Israeli? And I think the same, you have the same here. How do you get back to the 9/11 Christian? I think there is an aspect though that you have to, as I said before, build faith during good times in order that it's there in the bad times. In other words, it wasn't just random that people jumped into help when things got bad. Everyone had a pretty good education. They went a bit off the way for about a year or two before the war, and they were infighting, but actually they had it inside. And I think that, with good Christian education from childhood, people have it inside. They might forget it, they get diverted by other things, but if they have it inside, they will come back when it's necessary. So I think it comes back to the question: how do you make sure people do have it inside? Because if they don't, then it won't come out. And that's what we're seeing in England. There's a lot of immigration from different countries. People haven't had the same education. They don't have the same values. And if there was an attack on England, there would be absolutely nobody who would go to help. And even the people who would have gone to help would say, well, I'm not going to go help because that group of 20-30% of the population, they're not doing anything, so why should I risk my life for them? And the whole thing falls apart. So how do you create cohesiveness in society? That's exactly what we're struggling with. And maybe in that we'll be also light up to the nations if we figure it out.
We had a question back here.
Thanks, Rabbi Leo, for being here today. I really enjoyed your what if segment. I a little bit. I believe you said your tragedy happened in April 2023. Is that correct? So I was just curious. The October 7th event, 6 months later, so close together. How did that affect you personally in light of what happened? Was it a setback? Did you have now two traumas to worry about, or did you just view it totally differently in light of what had happened?
Thank you. Lovely question. And the answer is, as I said, after the first tragedy, I said to my kids, we are starting a new world. The world sign again is a different world. And on October the 7th, we felt it was a third world. We were in a third world, and everything that happened before we put aside, and now we're in a new space. So in a sense, it did, on the contrary, it didn't reignite the pain of our tragedy. It took us a step away from our tragedy and thrust us into this national situation, which was further away from our tragedy, which I guess is a bit bizarre. Maybe one last question, then maybe I'll be to talk to people in.
I do want to say thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you and your, we all do. I know I speak for Mayor, and we appreciate you and your sharing going through tragedy. I love how you said there's not a now, it's either the past or the future. And then with the future, you have to take a blank sheet of paper and start writing again. And I think that's wonderful. I appreciate the Jewish heart for the American nation and seeing what many of us believers are struggling with and against. And my heart has been for the young people, that the 16 to 40-year-old, and even some of the 40s, and because I have kids in all those in that age group, but I see a big difference between what my 41-year-old went through and now what my 27-year-old is. So I am grateful and thank you for your prayers. Thank you as a nation that y'all are praying for us in your synagogues, because I know we're praying for y'all and many of us are helping in that regard. But it's nice to know that you are also praying for our young people as we are wanting the Lord to help show us what to do. You're right. Losing Charlie Kirk was a hard thing. He was right. Then we had to stand up.
Thank you. And I also end on one thing that I talked a little bit about hope, and the words of my teacher, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs. He said there's a difference between optimism and hope. Optimism is believing that things will get better, and hope is doing something to make it better. And I think that what we need is less optimism and more hope. and the people in this room and your friends and the wider Christian community, the Zionist Jews, who people as Zionists or Zionist Christians, I define Zionist Christians, any Christians read the Bible. So any Christians read the Bible should have hope and should say, okay, what can I do to make this better? Because if it's not you, who's going to do this? Because you read the Bible and you know that this is true. The people who founded this country founded on very strong religious biblical values. And anyone who says this is a liberal democratic state is completely wrong. It's a Christian biblical state with biblical values. It happens to use democracy and other different means in order to run efficiently. But basically what keeps it free is religious Christian values. And if those are eroded, this country will not survive. So this is the challenge for you, and please say I have hope. I know that you'll do something about it. So thank you.
Rabbi Leo, we have two questions. Sorry. Well, one thing I wanted to say is that the Jewish people wouldn't have a Bible to read. And to talk about Chaim Solomon, our nation would be where it is today. Am I right? If you don't understand if you don't know who Chaim Solomon is, look him up. He was the one that helped save our nation when President George Washington, asked him to fund our nation pretty much in the war. And so without Chaim Solomon, the USA wouldn't be where it is today, and God's providence as well, obviously. So thank you.
So every time someone comes from Israel, I often ask about the general sentiment about Red Heifer rebuilding the Jewish temple on the Temple Mount, and generally I've been asking for 12, 15 years, and the response I normally get is that it's not on the minds of most people at all. It's not a priority. And some most people are not even thinking about it or wouldn't want it at all. What are you seeing as far as the trend in Israel right now?
Sadly, I think you're right, but let me tell you my view on it if it's of any interest. The Bible, the Old Testament talks about two possibilities of bringing the Messiah. either it's going to happen peacefully or it will happen after Gog and Magog, which is a massive war between Iran and America, or whatever it is. That's basically the Jewish view of how these things will pan out. The Christian view, as I understand, is that Jesus will come back either peacefully or after Armageddon. I think I'm right in saying that. The Muslims believe that it will come either peacefully or through jihad. But one of the things that they all have in common is that the way for it to happen peacefully is if we rebuild the third temple. And the problem that we have at the moment is the temple is controlled by another religion. It's not a holy building for them, it's fabrication. But along with every other country that they conquered, they built a mosque on top of the holiest site in that country, and you can see that in Constantinople. You see that in India. That's what they did in order to conquer. But until we rebuild the temple, the threat of world war is looming. Now, this is contrary to popular opinion, which says that if we were to rebuild the third temple, that would cause World War III. But as we saw with your previous president, who said, don't attack the Philadelphia corridor, which was the border between Egypt and Gaza, because that would cause World War. It turned out that was actually the strategically correct thing to do, because it stopped the Hamas getting more weapons and basically led towards the ending of the war. So a lot of the secular ideas of what we might do are completely the opposite to the truth. And so if we're sitting here worried about what would happen if we start not moving the Dome of the Rock somewhere else and rebuilding our temple because they think it's going to cause World War III, actually the truth is the opposite. If we don't do that, we'll be in World War III. So I think that it's partly education. I think that the more that these liberal ideas are being just knocked on the head and proven to be completely wrong, the more we're getting closer to the point where we can actually start being more sensible and ignoring them.
First of all, a big round of applause and a big thanks to our Leo team and to the friends that taking for coming all the way from across Israel. We really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you. I know a lot of you traveled big distances to be here today. Again, Dr. Victoria Sarvadi and Paul, we really, really appreciate you. So just a couple quick announcements. First of all, when Rabbi D asked about the young people, one of the things that Israel 365 does is that we bring young leaderships trips to Israel. I think you've met some of our young leaders and influencers. And it's a highly subsidized trip, and we bring young people, and it's been incredible. One of my colleagues, Rabbi Mark Fishman, runs that program, and some of you have met Rabbi Mark. So if you want some more information about that, if you know someone you think should go on the trip, or you're in a situation to financially help, that would all be very appreciated. Just want to talk for a second about two books. One is, I mentioned before, the Book of Ruth, and we have them available today. This is a perfect time for it. And I know we don't have many of your books, but we're going to send out the links for Rabbi D's books, but maybe a Rabbi D would consider signing this. If anyone wants it, it's $10, no shipping, no handling, no tax. We'll hand it right off to you. And then our founder, Rabbi Tuli Weiss, wrote a beautiful new book called Universal Zionism. Kathleen will give you a book review. She's in 3/4 of the way through it. And a few people here have read it. It's a fantastic book. I've got this available for you as well. And just one last announcement that next Sunday, Naomi maybe give a wave again. Next Sunday at Naomi's home, we're going to have Rabbi Pesach Wolicki. We get a lot of rabbis here from Israel, right? They, for some reason, they love to come to Dallas, which we love. And again, hopefully it's not Rabbi Leo D and Eliza's last trip. It's the first trip to Texas, hopefully not the last one. So anyway, thank you all. Did you want to say any last words, Victoria? Okay.
Sure.
Okay.
First, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Make sure that you make new friends, guys. I want all of you at Nathaniel Fellowship to reach out and touch and just greet these our Jewish friends. Thank you for coming. Thank you for becoming our friends today. And thank you so much, Rabbi Leo, and your beautiful wife. I'm filled. You are a miracle. You're an amazing miracle. And you've given me a lot of hope. So thank you. God bless you and have a wonderful rest of your Sunday.
Great. Good.
Thank you so much for coming. Well, be careful. Until next time. Yay. Yeah. Right outside. Yeah. Hope you'll enjoy.